Hi, Kelly. How are you?
Hi, Camber. I'm great. How are you?
I am good. The weather here is a little bit dreary, but that's okay. So I want to welcome everyone to the Give Live. Today we're talking about optimizing donation forms for Giving Tuesday and beyond. And every time I've said that since we settled on what we're talking about, I like channel Buzz Lightyear in my head and I'm like, and beyond. So it's been like driving me crazy, even when the emails I'm like, and beyond. But anyways, if you have joined us from PayPal, you're head of giving products there, and you are a product leader passionate about leveraging technology to drive social impact. And as the head of giving products at PayPal, you oversee donation payments, charity onboarding and verification, and partner fundraising capabilities. You are a wealth of knowledge in payments, and you are really fascinated by the intersection of data, design, and behavioral science, and how that can improve user experiences and foster network growth, which is kind of how we landed on our topic today. So Kelly, before you got to PayPal, you worked at the Federal Reserve. And you began your career in M&A advisory for financial services companies at William Blair. You're going to have to explain to me what that is in a second. But your educational background includes a joint MBA and public policy degree from the University of Chicago and a bachelor's degree in economics from Spelman College. Originally from Detroit, you now call San Francisco home. And in your leisure time, you balance farmers market visits, very nice, with winery tours and enjoying the best of California weather. So Kelly, welcome.
Thank you so much, Camber. I'm so happy to be here and discuss one of my favorite topics with you. And I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, we have had, we're going to get into a little bit earlier, but we've had a partnership with PayPal for a really long time. And I've had the absolute pleasure of getting to know you and your team over the last 6 months to a year since kind of moving into this role with Give. So I'm very happy to have you here. Before we get into some things, first, what is M&A advisory? What does that mean?
That's a great question. So it just stands for mergers and acquisitions.
Okay, got
Yeah,
it.
yeah. I started my I've been in essentially financial services my whole
Yeah.
career. Even then I was looking at like other finance firms and
Mhm.
banks and looking at ways that we could help them grow their businesses.
There we go. Okay, mergers and acquisitions. That makes more sense now. For those of you watching who don't know me, I'm Camber. I'm the product marketing manager here at Give WP. I actually just had my 3rd-year anniversary here, so that's fun. Thank you, thank you. Some general housekeeping notes. There is a chat. Please feel free to ask questions in the chat. We will hold those until the end of our conversation, and Kelly and I can answer those. So please feel free as they come to your mind, stick them in there, and we'll keep an eye on them. And this is also going to be available for a replay, like as soon as we're done. So if you're worried like about missing some insight or tidbit, please don't. You will be able to watch it at any second of any day that you're ready to. So let's dig in. So we're chatting about donation form optimization, specifically for Giving Tuesday, because that's the next real looming big day for organizations. And I'm sure that everyone watching does know what Giving Tuesday is, but just in case, let's kind of talk about why Giving Tuesday is so critical for nonprofits.
Sure. Yeah, of course. So, yeah, most already know this, but Giving Tuesday is just a global holiday of generosity where people all around the world are going to be coming together to really harness the power of community and also promote giving to charitable causes. So, you guys know probably when it happens. It's typically late in November, just after Thanksgiving for those of us in the US. And it's really the kickoff for giving season from Thanksgiving all the way to the end of the year. So it's a way to really optimize and hit the ground running in terms of that key season for giving.
Absolutely. And last year, I know that like something $3 billion was raised, which is a pretty significant amount of money. And I feel like we've kind of been on par with that amount for the last couple of years, which is very good to know because giving has seen a decline since the pandemic. But Giving Tuesday still seems to be on track. Every year we're seeing big donations, big numbers coming out of that day.
Totally. We almost view it as like our Super Bowl for anyone in the
Mhm.
giving space because it's always so interesting to see, okay, how did we do this year compared to last year? What's happening? Where's their growth? Where's their stagnation?
Mhm.
I think that this year will be no different, especially since Giving Tuesday is coming, a few weeks after elections, presidential
Mhm.
US, like there's about to be some shakeups, and it'll be
Yeah.
really interesting how that comes into play for where people choose to donate their dollars.
Yeah, absolutely. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember last year when I opened my Venmo on Giving Tuesday, there was like a directory basically of organizations that I could choose from. So, how involved have you guys gotten in Giving Tuesday, like PayPal giving products in general? And what are you kind of looking forward to this year for Giving Tuesday?
Yeah, totally. So I believe Venmo charity profiles was something that
Yeah.
was launched probably last year, maybe even the year before. And we typically do some really cool like marketing campaigns
Mhm,
around Venmo to tap into like that aspect of social giving.
mhm,
But I'd say overall, PayPal has been involved with Giving Tuesday right since the start in 2012. And our focus is always pretty much the same in terms of enabling donations,
mhm,
also measuring the impact of those donations, and spreading awareness around the opportunity to give, whether it's on Venmo or
mhm,
our core PayPal websites.
mhm. Yeah, perfect. So something that you have spent a lot of time doing in your role, and even just as something that you're passionate about, is kind of learning, taking that data and being able to extrapolate it out into stories. So we're able to do that and learn how to optimize our donation forms, learn how to optimize our emails, our social messaging, all of that with these different data points. So help me understand how an optimized form um, married together with understanding your donor can impact your overall success on Giving Tuesday as an organization.
Yeah, totally. So I think it's important to remember that donors entering your donation form on Giving Tuesday likely already know about your cause. Their interest has been piqued, and they really have an intent to donate.
Mhm.
So, getting into the donation funnel, most drop offs typically happen on that very first stage of the funnel, which is why it's so important to build trust and reduce that user anxiety up front. And the way to do this is by having an optimized form where the transaction is seamless, design is clean, minimal data input required, and the
Mhm.
user's payment method is shown. And this all just helps users and helps donors to have a positive, stress-free experience giving
Mhm.
back.
Yeah. So you mentioned, that Giving Tuesday is right after elections this year. So with elections in mind, kind of what's going on economically, why is it especially helpful to ensure this year that your donation forms are optimized for giving?
Yeah, exactly. So I think in addition to elections, I think it's especially important this year, just given the data that has been coming out about giving
Mhm.
and kind of the broader climate where you do have typically everyday donors that are just impacted by headwinds,
Mhm.
impacted by things like inflation, and may have tighter purses to really
Mhm.
contribute. So you want to still have that participation, but also be mindful of where people are from an economics point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. And that does take some knowledge and understanding of your donors and kind of where they're at. But that's a whole big conversation that we're not going to get into just yet. But so simplifying the donation form process is something that you mentioned. Clean design, very few fields, and that can contribute to higher engagement and conversion. But can you kind of get into the how and the why behind that for us?
Absolutely. So simplicity is really key, as you mentioned. And so again, by the time a user makes it into your donation form, they've probably already like seen your website and understand the mission and background. However, you'll want users to ride out on those feelings of inspiration and connection to the mission and being in action with your mission by donating. So Having a simple donation form really helps users lessen the mental load. So, for example, the less manual form fields required to fill out, the higher conversion rates typically are, which means the higher the number of donations, the higher the number of donors. And I'll also say that this is where digital wallets like PayPal can be very helpful. PayPal alone is shown to increase checkout conversion of nonprofits by 32%. And it's primarily because of that convenience factor of not having to go and search for your credit card or your debit card in order to donate.
Yeah, I've probably said this on every other live stream this year, but I almost never know where my debit card is. So if I can't pay with like Tap to Pay or Venmo or PayPal, like I just probably won't end up doing it in that moment, and then I'll never come back around to it. So one of the things that I want to touch on is the fewer form fields. So this is a question that we get a lot, like in our website audits or when we're doing demos. Which is just like, what is the sweet spot for how much information you should collect on your forms? And we always tell organizations, like, really, that donation form should be the minimal number of things that you need to process that donation. So if your organization sends out T-shirts or something to donors, it might not be necessary to take that like the address or the shirt size right there in that donation form. It might be worth setting up an automation that follows up with them. Because at the end of the day, the more form fields there are, the less likely a user is to complete all of those. It looks too daunting, more than they want to do to just make a donation. So what are some of the fields that you feel might be not necessary, but helpful to the form beyond like name, credit card information, things like that? Should there be like an opt-in to our fundraising newsletter, or is there anything extraneous that you would suggest for those forms?
Yeah, I think it really depends on your nonprofit and your users. But I would say, generally speaking, my top features would definitely be suggested donation amounts, which I know we'll get into.
Yeah.
Also, going back to flexible payment methods, I really love seeing a recurring option and also an upgrade to recurring option. And then I would say, generally, it's just very important that the form is optimized for mobile usage.
Yeah.
And by that, I mean, again, simple aesthetics, easy to navigate, but also no like critical CTAs like falling below the fold. So having a sticky CTA that users can always see that complete donation button can be really helpful.
Yeah. So below the fold, for anyone listening, just means like if you have to scroll up on your computer or your phone or your tablet or whatever to see that CTA, that's below the fold and not ideal for conversion. So as far as the suggested donation amounts, I know that we're going to get into that right now when we're going to talk about donor behavior, psychological triggers, and especially how those things work in regards to checkout. And a lot of this is transferable across e-commerce in general. But can you tell us a little bit about the importance of understanding those behaviors and triggers?
Totally, yes. One of my favorite ways to incorporate like behavioral triggers and psychology into the donation process would exactly be through anchoring with suggested donation amounts. And we actually explored this concept of anchoring in a research collaboration that PayPal had with Stanford. Our joint experiment studied the impact of incorporating a low donation amount versus a high donation amount, still within a set of 4 suggested options. So treatment A had a low anchor and treatment B had a high anchor. And this was measured against our baseline control, which again still showed 4 suggested options. What we found was that by replacing one relatively unused midpoint donation amount, in this case it was $75, with either a lower or higher reference point, such as $10 or $200, actually increase overall donation volumes. So what we learned was that anchoring low increases overall conversion. Anchoring high increases the average donation size and
Mhm.
decreases conversion,
Mhm.
but both were a net positive for the donation volumes, which we obviously care about.
Right.
So,
So overall, those two different anchor points increased the revenue for that particular donation form. But I mean, depending on what you want out of it, you'd either increased or decreased conversion or an increased average donation size. So it's kind of a matter of like what's important to that organization. Um, yeah.
exactly.
So anchoring, so we at Give, we have, the set donation amounts, and we're able to even do like impact units on those amounts. You can add a description, right? So like say that you are an organization that provides school supplies to underserved kids, right? So it would be like $10 provides paper and pens, and $200 is like a backpack and a what's the word I'm looking for? Calculator. So that's always very helpful too. Um, do you suggest, like, when you have those suggested donation amounts, that there's one like highlighted that you would really like people to choose? So if you've got, 25, 50, 75, 100, and you highlight 75, is that, I mean, you may not know, but does that make a difference?
Yeah, I think it really depends. Depend on each individual scenario, but definitely pay attention to which option users are selecting most
Mhm.
frequently. And if you do have a connection, of course, in terms of where your nonprofit is most in need, feel
Mhm.
free to highlight that to users to kind of grab their
Mhm.
attention.
Mhm.
Um, I would I will say that, like, going back to Giving Tuesday,
Mhm.
our experiment was really interesting because sometimes you'll have users that, or you'll hear the advice to look at your median donations and then go
Mhm.
slightly higher to inch users up. But
Mhm.
I think there's a ton of value sometimes in anchoring low, and if you're using the impact statements that you're calling out, like really leaning into those lower amounts, especially
Mhm.
on Giving Tuesday, to get more users into your flow without them having them feel guilty about only being able to give like $5 or $10.
I can't remember the study that I read, but it fully supported what you're saying, which is that if you suggested a lower donation amount, it did exactly that. It made it like, oh, I don't feel bad that I can only give $5 or $10. And also on Giving Tuesday, I think that you have to remember that every organization is asking for money that day. And so if you're like me, I'm giving to multiple organizations on Giving Tuesday and I'm not made of money. So there's, an overall amount that I'm comfortable giving, and I will divvy it up. So I may not be able to give $200 to every organization, but I have $25 to every organization.
Yeah.
And that kind of just removes that arbitrary obstacle that I think people have when they think about giving. And it's also very important to remember that if everyone gave $5, we would be in a really good spot, right? So those donations really do matter.
Totally. And I think especially like on Giving Tuesday, as you're mentioning, the goal is really donor participation and being inclusive to donors of all types to ultimately broaden your reach and impact.
Yeah.
So
Right.
totally agree.
Right. So even though, like you mentioned in the beginning, that a lot of the people that are giving on Giving Tuesday are already generally familiar with that organization. But there are people who are going to discover your organization on Giving Tuesday because there's a ton of social messaging going out. There are companies like PayPal doing the charity profiles. So you are going to come across things. And the last thing that you want to do is, you know, turn away a brand new donor by not making them feel like, oh, we have these diversified payment options and we have these diverse options for dollar amount, and you can give recurring donations. That's really easy to do, or you can do all these different things. So there's a ton of things to think about all the time, but we also want to talk about not just like, oh, what do we put on our form, but how we humanize the checkout process.
Mhm.
Um, which I think a lot of people are like, we're online fundraising. How could you possibly humanize the checkout process? So what does that mean and why is that important?
Definitely. So I think it's important to remember, and kind of to our point, that giving any money can be a highly personal and emotional
Mhm.
experience. And that generosity is really born from connection and thrives when there's that relational component and people can see themselves as a part of a community that you're building out or as a part of your mission. So, in order to humanize your form, I think that small messaging tweaks can go a long way in terms of letting your users know that your
Mhm.
organization recognizes them. For example, simply like referring to them by name if you can in your email campaigns, or after they donate, if you're
Mhm.
showing a thank you message on the page.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, I think I think also on the donation form itself, using more conversational language, such
Mhm.
as "How would you like to give?" instead of "Enter amount here," is also really
Mhm.
helpful. And
Mhm.
that's something that Give WP forms are very conducive to.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and then just following up on messaging, in general, messaging that speaks to the power of a collective group can
Mhm.
really help donors with that relational component that's
Mhm.
sometimes missing. And we, again, at PayPal, we ran an experiment to better understand the power of messaging specifically during a donation. And this experiment was for messaging along the lines of compelling users to upgrade from a one-time donation to a recurring donation. Um, and of course, recurring donations are very helpful for
Mhm.
securing and retaining
Yeah.
long-term donors. Most nonprofits are aware of this. For this experiment itself, what we did was surfaced a short one-line message that was either others focused and spoke to themes of community and long-term planning. For example, help us plan for a brighter future, or become
Mhm.
a sustained supporter of our community. Or our other treatment was more so self-focused and spoke to themes of convenience, like
Mhm.
simplify your giving with automated donations. And the goal here was to really understand which iteration would generate more recurring donors versus our control of no message at all.
Mhm.
What we found for this experiment was that the recurring opt-in rate was highest with that others focused messaging that spoke to themes of longevity, impact, and community when compared to the alternative or no messaging at all. So this just confirmed our hypothesis that users are quite sensitive to small changes in messaging, and it
Mhm.
can be used as a tool.
Yeah, there was even some information that I read not too long ago, and I'm gonna have to look it up. I wish I had done this beforehand, but I didn't think about it until now. That even just changing the messaging from donate to make a gift, like made it like so much more easier for people to go like, oh, a gift. Like, I can do that. I want to gift money to this place. I want to help them do these things. A gift is something personal that you give to somebody, right? Like, I give gifts to my family. I give gifts to my friends. I don't give gifts to a random stranger on the street, but I'll give a gift to this organization that I deeply care about. So there's so many little ways to kind of tweak that messaging. And I want to go back to what you're saying, even about like the personalization of emails. So obviously, you want to make sure that you're following up with a thank you email and that you're keeping in touch with these donors fairly regularly, right? Like not too much, not too little, but you don't want the next time they hear from you to be next Giving Tuesday. So there's ways to personalize depending on what platform you use to pull in that donation amount, to pull in that name, to give them information on how they can opt in. And then you can even follow up with like a Giving Tuesday impact report. Like, this is how we did, this is what our goal was, this is what we're going to be able to do with this money. Because at the end of the day, I think people give because they want to impact this thing that they care about. And they could care about it for a number of reasons, right? Like maybe a family member dealt with cancer, or they grew up in a certain town and they just want to, give back to that place. Some people do give for just tax write-offs, but not as many as you probably think. And so being able to, kind of take that information and share that impact with them, I think is also extremely important.
Totally.
So then that's something that we want to keep in mind as far as messaging goes. There's tons of ways that you communicate with folks. And I don't want to get ahead of myself because I know we're going to talk about this a little bit more. But because we were talking about like that power of community, I want to touch really quick on Venmo, because Venmo as a service in general took off because it is a social platform where you just happen to transact money. So for the longest time when Venmo came out, we would make the craziest little messages, to send money back and forth for dinners or whatever. And so that's really the part of Venmo that I think is so different from any other like payment platform or method, is that it's a social platform. And that's what makes it feel like community driven. Do you think that makes a difference as well? Or what are your thoughts kind of on that social aspect of Venmo?
Definitely. I mean, I've also grown up on Venmo for the past few years, and I find it so engaging. Like every time I transact, I want to stay within the app. So it really has that going for it. And now that you have Venmo charity profiles and you can see who your friends are contributing to, it just up levels that kind of instant story-driven giving trend that we've been seeing for some time across multiple platforms, including like Instagram as well.
Yeah,
I do think for Venmo specifically, going back to like engaging and then providing flexible payment methods, it's so important to offer the options that speak to your target demographic. And for Venmo itself, it's huge with Gen Z and millennials. Today, there are over 60 million people that use Venmo every single month. And last quarter, I think Pay with Venmo actives, they grew 30%. So Venmo itself is truly emerging as, I think, a must-have payment method, especially for any user that's using a mobile device.
Yeah, I totally agree. We're going to actually move right into payment methods. So we'll be able to get into Venmo a little bit more in a second, because I am also very excited about Venmo. So during the payment process, something that we talk a lot about at GiveWP is the payment methods that you offer and kind of using those to future-proof your fundraising. So offering diverse payment options, I think, is like a must-have. But why is it, from your point of view, so important to have that diverse array of options for folks?
Yeah, I do think for nonprofits and just for online businesses in general, accepting a limited number of payment methods simply doesn't cut it. It's never been more critical today for organizations to respond to their customers' preferences and offer them the payment flexibility and choice that they're craving. So the option to give using a debit card, a credit card, ACH, digital wallets, like PayPal and Venmo, is just truly table stakes in what consumers are expecting today. And I think what's also critical here is that every single person will have their own preference for a financial instrument. However, something that we've talked about is that most platforms can also personalize the option shown to users based on their device type. So you're not going to be inundated with every single payment method that you've enabled. But yes, so simply having multiple ways to pay is a certain ways to increase those users who successfully donate on your form.
Yeah. And it goes back to what we were even saying before about just the ease and simplicity of not necessarily needing to hunt down your wallet, find your debit card, your credit card, whatever, and just make it super easy. And I want to really, really hone in on what you said about the personalization of options, because that's something that I feel like a lot of folks, and maybe we don't make it very clear, but a lot of folks are like, well, if I enable all of these payment options, that's too many options and too many decisions for someone to make. But for instance, I am not going to be shown Google Pay. I don't use an Android. I'm going to be shown Apple Pay and vice versa. So if you don't use those payment methods, they're not going to show up for your donors if they don't use them. So that's something very important to keep in mind. I want to ask, because someone just asked in the chat, so I'm just going to go ahead and ask now. But since we're on the topic, is there, how do you decide whether or not you want to include a particular payment method in your donation forms? I think they're wondering if you can have too many.
Yeah, that's interesting, and it would be something good to experiment around. But something that I see sometimes on nonprofit websites is that they might have multiple payment methods, but it's not actually appearing in a centralized place on one form. So I think that piece is really critical. I also think, like, for example, if you have Google Pay and Apple Pay enabled, not both are going to show because the customer either has an Android or an Apple device. And I don't know. I'm of the mindset to think you can't have too many, but your thoughts too.
Yeah, no, me too. I mean, I think that at the end of the day, I mean, to answer the question, I think a lot of it is going to depend on what the main demographic of your organization is, right? If your main demographic is, boomers, or what's the generation right under them? Why can I never remember that name? Gen X, thank you. If they're boomers or Gen X, having an ACH option, so that's a direct debit from a bank account, is a really good option. My dad would not have known what Venmo was or how to use it, So I think that that's an important thing to kind of take away from the conversation is who your current demographics are. But also when we talk about future proofing, you also want to make sure that if a Gen Zer stumbles across your organization, that they have a way to pay that feels native to them as well. So I think you just have to decide like what your ultimate goals are. And that's going to help you decide on your options. And just as another note for ACH payments, it is so good to have ACH payments on your forms, because if donors opt into ACH versus using a debit card and they do recurring payments, you're never going to run into, oh, my debit card was lost, my debit card was stolen, I got a new one. And then you lose that recurring revenue because of that card situation. So I think it's so important, especially if you have that like older demographic, to really push that ACH option so that you're not losing out on that recurring revenue. But I think that's one of the things I see fewest on forms is an ACH option.
Yeah, totally. And the other piece is that it's typically lower fees as well. So for your nonprofit.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So I want to move on to talk about specifically mobile donations. So like Venmo, obviously. Last year during Giving Tuesday, one of the most fascinating things for me at Give was that we saw like 150% increase in donations over mobile payment options like Venmo. And so how do having those mobile payment options impact the donor experience and conversion rates on that?
Yeah. Well, I think we see that regarding mobile device usage in general. Like I also saw a stat that there are like 88% of people that are spending time on mobile devices actually using applications rather than the web. So this kind of lets us know that we continue to see like social media playing a major role here. So we see people that might be transitioning from like a social media site or seeing like a fundraising campaign on Instagram or another site, and then moving on to your nonprofit website in order to actually donate. I think for mobile devices specifically, that's when having a digital wallet is really, really important. So getting back to those options like Apple Pay, Google Pay, PayPal, Venmo, all those options that are digitally native to a user's phone is what can really increase conversion.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. I very rarely I'm not using the web on my phone almost ever. And that's doubly true for Gen Z, is that if they're searching, they are searching on TikTok. they are not using Google to find anything. They're using TikTok to find restaurants, things to do, whatever passions they feel really strongly about, they are doing that in TikTok. So it really is important to consider all of those like native elements, Venmo being one of those. And I just think it's so important, going back to that future proofing conversation, that you have multiple ways for folks to donate, regardless of what demographic they fall into, whether that's age or spending power. It's so important. At the end of the day, if you are only catering to boomers, they're eventually not going to be here anymore. And then what's going to happen?
Yeah,
That was kind of a dark thing to say. I'm sorry, but that's the truth of the situation. We kind of alluded, I think, to this in the very beginning of the conversation, as it relates to security and trust. Even just having a PayPal option on a donation form, that can increase conversions, I think you said, by 32%. And yes, part of that has to be because people see that PayPal logo. They're like, okay, I trust PayPal. I know that it's going to be good. I'm not going to get my information stolen. I'm not going to get this, that, and the other thing. So tell me, like, how, not just for PayPal, but in general, how security and trust works in the payment process. And how can our organizations make sure that they're like actually implementing those processes in like an effective manner?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I think about trust, actually, I think about it in two ways. So trust in terms of the nonprofit themselves and their usage of funds being donated, in addition to trust in the payments process. So when it comes to the payments aspect, however, trust, of course, matters given the risks that are present online and user anxiety that might appear just from sharing sensitive data. So I think primarily just by having like a recognized payment method as an option, and ideally not having to enter your credit card information every time you transact is so important. And this is where like brands like PayPal really stand out because you do have that globally accepted, trusted brand. You do have that army of a risk team that's
that legal team that I'm just kidding. Just kidding. Don't say no.
But yeah, this is we have another market study that was run, and this time it said that actually 37% of donors donate more money just because they're able to use like PayPal, and I think that the same could probably go for most big brand digital wallets. But the number one reason people quoted was that trust and security factor. So
yeah. And that's something that we look into when we do like our fundraising website audits. Something that we're looking at is that factor of trust, and trust comes into play throughout your website, not just on your donation form. So if you come across an organization whose site looks like maybe it hasn't been updated since 1992, that immediately makes you go like, ooh, I don't feel very safe. And then kind of same for, the payment processing. If I don't know who's processing those payments, that makes me feel uneasy as well. So that's a really important part of giving. And you don't want ever for your donors to feel like they can't trust their information to you. Their credit card information, their financial information, their personal information. I want to go back to what you were saying about the trust and security around giving, around what organizations are doing with their money. What do you think is the best way for nonprofits to share that information out, like from the get-go? If you're not already a donor, you're not receiving our impact reports, is it like graphs and charts? Is it testimonials? Is it stories? Like, what is the best way to make sure that those things are getting out there right off the bat?
Yeah, I think there are multiple ways that you can show it, but definitely surface it on your website. And again, try to keep the donation form itself as clean as
Yeah.
possible. But I think even a way to introduce trust is to like let nonprofits know that you have like a registered charity, or that
Mhm.
you're vetted by a third party such as Candid.
Mhm.
So simple, like I see a lot like a simple stamp of approval. That's great. I also think transparency in terms of how many of your funds, how much
Mhm.
of your funds goes to programming can be
Mhm.
helpful. Um, but yeah, I think it can go it can go both ways. But
Mhm.
in general, having transparency about
Mhm.
your funds and your operations really helps and goes a long way when it comes to enhancing user trust and security in your nonprofit.
Yeah. We have a good question, but that one is gonna wait. Sorry, that one's gonna wait this time. So we've been working together, Give and PayPal for a little while. And obviously we're talking about optimizing donation forms, but what are specific ways that GiveWP users can leverage PayPal products, PayPal giving products, for their Giving Tuesday campaigns?
Yeah, sure. So I think you shared a little bit about the history of GiveWP and PayPal at the beginning, but now we have an amazing Give and PayPal complete payments integration in which nonprofits can really access the full suite of products at PayPal,
Mhm.
including Pay with PayPal globally, Pay with Venmo in the US, along with our like recurring donation solution.
Mhm.
So I really start with just simply enabling PayPal and Venmo directly in
Mhm.
your GiveWP account. But moving beyond that, at PayPal, we really use our two-sided network to equip charities, but also engage our consumer network to respond to charity needs and make a
Mhm.
difference. So if you're not already, and if you're a registered charity, being a part of the PayPal Giving Fund is really helpful and will naturally help introduce more donors to your charity, like throughout the PayPal and
Mhm.
PayPal partner platforms. Bit of a tongue twister there.
Mhm. Yeah. So one of the things that we introduced recently was we made some updates to Braintree, which is a PayPal product.
Yes.
And now Braintree also supports recurring donations. Braintree is a little bit of its like own thing, I guess. It's typically for enterprise level organizations. Can you tell us a little bit more about the difference between Braintree payments and like a PayPal, just a general payment?
Yeah, so I think that's exactly it. Braintree is more geared towards large enterprises that have complex payments needs, and
Mhm.
it's perfect for any partnership that we might have with a company like
Mhm.
GiveWP. Whereas PayPal also now has a breadth of payment flavors and methods that are all available underneath the PayPal Complete Payments integration.
Mhm.
Um, but I believe both are really helpful
Mhm.
for nonprofits depending on what they're looking for. But
Mhm.
Braintree definitely is it's awesome that we have the recurring donation solution within
Mhm.
Braintree because you have things like ACH, which you mentioned.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I just always kind of want to mention that because I feel like Braintree gets excluded from conversations sometimes, and it is like a really great option, especially for organizations that are maybe doing more volume than some of the others. Um, so I know we're going to be wrapping up here in a few minutes, but I want to talk about Giving Tuesday, and out of all of everything we've talked about today, what's the one piece of advice that you would give nonprofits as we go into this Giving Tuesday and giving season?
Yeah, I would go back to something that you touched on actually, Camber, and that was the donation experience itself is really important, but definitely do not forget about that post-donation experience where you're following up with users, sending personalized thank you notes, sending them notes about the impact of their donation, because that will be really, really critical in terms of continuing to retain those users after
Mhm.
Giving Tuesday Tuesday is over, and ideally nurturing them for years to come. So I would definitely hone in on that post-donation experience.
Yes, I agree. I'm all about that post-donation experience. So we have a couple of questions, not too many, which I'm kind of surprised about. But the first question is about displaying like some sort of fundraising tracker on your forms or on your donation landing pages. Where maybe on Giving Tuesday, let's say you set a goal of $20,000 just for that day. And, you know, that tracker updates as people donate. Donors can see how close you are to that goal. They want to know if you feel that there's merit to that, or kind of just what your thoughts are as far as like that transparency piece is concerned, and if that is something that you think might be helpful.
Yeah. I mean, I think I can speak from my personal experience. I love seeing the donation tracker, and that really kind of underlies the importance of having a community, because you get to see not just like your own impact, but let's say you're sharing a link to this nonprofit with your friends. You get to see kind of the broader aspect of like how much you raised collectively as a team. So I personally love seeing donation trackers. What do you think?
I love them too. And I think that my only concern with them is that I feel like you kind of have to like finagle them a little bit. Because my worry is, okay, you reached your $20,000 goal. Are you going to be able to surpass it now because we have this thermometer that's fully filled out? Does that make people think like, oh, they've reached it, they don't need anything else? And so I don't have any stats to back that up. That's just, you know, my initial thought. But generally speaking, I think a thermometer of some sort, and I think a donor wall is super impactful for helping people feel like they're part of something greater than just themselves when it comes to giving to your organization. So that thermometer allows them to see, you know, overall this community is giving, and we're going to reach this goal, and, you know, this organization will be able to do what they need to do. And then the donor wall allows them to see what people are giving generally. Those people can leave comments. And so it's just kind of this social aspect that I think is really important too. So I mean, personally, I think that that's a must have kind of thing, especially on days like Giving Tuesday or specific to a campaign. Like if you need to raise 10 grand to build a community garden or something, working towards that goal is super important. The next question is about Venmo charity profiles. They want to know, I'm going to Google it. They want to know how they would be able to apply. I'm going to put an FAQ in here just so people can see more information, how they would apply. But I think mostly what I want you to cover while we're answering this question is like, who could create a charity profile? What are the like qualifications for that?
Yes, I think the primary qualification is that you do need to be a registered charity in the U.S. in order to qualify for Venmo charity profiles.
Okay.
That's probably the
thing we've talked about today.
Yeah, but thank you for popping this link in. We also have a few assets on the PayPal and Venmo website where you can learn more about the requirements for that flow.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, if anyone has any more questions, now is the time to ask them, because otherwise we're going to wrap up. Kelly, it was so nice having you on today. I really appreciate your time. I feel like we had a great conversation, and honestly, I feel like this is something that you and I could probably yap about for 3 or 4 hours easily.
It's such a fun topic. Thank you again for having me here. It's truly, it's one of my favorite topics, like gearing up for Giving Tuesday, but also going through experiments and helping get with our nonprofits and talk about how we can help each other be successful. So thank you again.
Very good. Thank you for coming on. For those of you watching, if you didn't get your questions in, you can come to our GiveWP Facebook group, ask away there. People will be able to answer, including myself, our product owners. Someone will get to you for sure. Okay, that's it. We're going to go. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.